Okay, great. Happy Friday, everyone. We are live, at least as far as the technology tells me, which is a mixed bag these days, but that's what it says. Welcome to the live show. I'm excited about our guest today. We'll get into that in a little bit, but just to give you some tantalizing trailers, we're gonna Sebastian. I just asked him how to say his name correctly, and I immediately did it the wrong way. Sebastian and I are going to talk about investment, leadership. He's got a book out called The Psychology of Leadership. I'm looking forward to asking questions about that. We'll dive into some things like psychology of sports, personality, goal induced blind, all of this sort of cool stuff. So it's going to be a rich conversation. And he also asked me if I'm all right with him asking me questions. So we'll see what kind of stuff I'm going to get riddled with. So that's what you got to look forward to today. As I always like to start these shows off, I'll share a little bit about my week, and it's been a really interesting week for me. The headline of the week is that I said, both Bay and I said goodbye to our oldest dog, Grimby. We have two dogs, or we had two dogs, and Grimby said goodbye yesterday. And you know, it's really sad, and I say that with a smile. I'm in my process, and it's been a really interesting week to witness myself as I move through, because I've known that this was coming, and I'm struck by the mundanity of life unfolding as I came upon this event. So what I mean by that is, Monday we've made the appointment. Thursday night, the vet was going to come and come to our house, and then we were going to, give Grimby a lot of treats and let him gently fall asleep, and then give him an overdose of anesthetic. And the nature of where we were at was that he was not at a point where, his hips couldn't let him walk, or where his bladder had gone so far that he was just peeing everywhere in the house, and to some extent that makes it a little more challenging, because when I look at my dog, I see an old dog, but he's not doing anything that is sort of driving me nuts. And the vet was reassuring us, there's of course no right answer to this. And some of the way, you can look at this is that we have a responsibility, or maybe even there's a kindness to help them along their journey, so to speak, before things get too bad. And when they get really, really bad, that can kind of trigger us to let go. So in any event, I think both Bay and I had an intuitive feeling like, this is here, and this is what there is to do. And what's been interesting is yesterday, I was working, I was doing stuff, and just over here was Grimby sawing logs, snoring louder than ever before, as he always manages to do. He's a record-breaking dog. And, I'd look across and just like, oh man, I love that dog. But there wasn't any sort of extra to it. It wasn't like, today's the day and I super love this dog. And what that called forward in me was this doubt. Am I doing this right? Should I be pouring more into this moment? And my process has been different from Bay's. Bay tends to have her heart more on her sleeve, and I guess the way I experience my emotions is a little more internal. And I've done a lot of work to, the way I'd put it is like, let myself feel what I'm feeling. And there's just sort of a density to me, like it takes some time for that stuff to move through the denseness of the fiber of my being. And so as I've been moving through these days, as I've been witnessing myself, as I've been surrendering to letting myself feel what I'm feeling, part of what shows up are lots of questions like, am I doing this wrong? Am I actually honoring my dog? Am I honoring my feelings? Am I holding this sacred enough? Is there something I should be doing yesterday? Should I be building him a shrine? Should I be canceling all my calls? And, some of the practice, I don't want to turn this into a lesson, but the practice for me, at least right now, is to trust and honor what's there for me, and just let that be. And then the real way that we learn, or at least I believe the real way we learn to discern from this stuff, is we lean down that particular path, and then we discover as time goes on, like, was that actually the path? Or is there maybe a bit of a correction for me to make? And it's really all we can do. We can work with coaches, we can work with leaders that support us, but really the job of those people is simply to help us get better at doing that thing I just described. Excuse me. So the fantasy might be, oh, I'm going to work with Adam, and then he's going to tell me when I should lean left. And instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I notice you're leaning a lot to the right. Is that what you want to be doing right now? How does that feel to you? And so it's more of a mirror, just reflecting back what you're doing and inviting you to ask yourself, is that what I want to be doing? Rather than something more, kind of consulty, to be like, do this, go in this direction. This is the way you should be leaning. So it's been driving up plenty. It's been really, I don't like using this word fascinating because it's very bypassy. It's fascinating watching myself in my grief, and now I get to hang out in fascination instead of grief. But it's quite a thing to watch myself through all this. And I think really what I'm learning is to honor my own process exactly as it is, and to stand sovereign in that. So the other side of this, and then we'll shift the focus off me quickly, ideally. But the other side of this is that my process is different than Bay's. And sometimes what I do with that is I see how she's just so free and so expressed in her emotions around her heartbreak. And I feel like I'm doing it wrong. And sometimes she looks over at me and sees the way I'm holding this, being with this, and feels like I'm doing it wrong. And her version of me doing it wrong would be like, I just don't care. I'm heartless. I'm projecting my own sort of assumptions a little bit onto her. But we've talked about this. There's some flavor of this, and historically, what I would do is scramble to try to get myself over to the way things look for her or for other people. There's this subtle societal expectation of how grief ought to look, and the way grief looks to me is like action. It looks like doing things punctuated by moments of like sadness. And then the work for me is to really honor those moments of sadness when they come, and to slow down and to allow the space for them to like flow through me. And then on the flip side is not to like to grab a hold of them, because the temptation for me would be like, oh, finally I'm grieving. Whoops, let's fix that mic. Nice. Finally I'm grieving. It's here. I'm feeling sad. Let's be sad. And then the moment, of course, passes through me, and I'm ready to do the next chunk of whatever there is in front of me. And the temptation from my fear and story that I'm not doing things right would be to like, got to grab a hold of that. How do I be more sad? Maybe I'll put on sad singer-songwriter that I can't think of in this moment. Maybe I'll put a cardigan around me and make myself a cup of tea and slump, and and that's just not my process, at least for now. Who knows? It may morph, it may shift. And so, this is one of the final parting gifts of Grimby, my dog, to me, is the opportunity to just really honor him in my way, and to trust that that's beautiful and sacred in its own right. So if you're having a beer tonight on Friday night, you can pour a little bit out for little Grimby up there in Grimby heaven. Excuse me, I've been very phlegmatic as of late. Okay, so the last thing I want to say on this is just express thank you to everyone that has come out of the woodwork, really, to wish me well, to send love my way. It's been cool. There's just been names. I'm like, I haven't seen this name in like years. I guess Grimby's doing some work up there, sending some dog telegrams and stuff. So thank you everyone for your kind thoughts. Okay, let's have a sip of coffee. And let's move forward. So as I shared today, I'm going to set this up a little bit more. I am getting a ton of requests to be on this podcast, and that's very awesome and delightful. The thing that's less awesome is that most of them are clearly they've moved into an AI-based approach, meaning what's happened is people point their AI at my podcast where it's hosted. The AI scans the most recent episode. it creates a sort of first paragraph that's like, I loved your most recent episode. This really twigged for me, blah, 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 blah. It made me think of, and then insert the person's bio. I think they'd be good at, and then another generic paragraph that the stuff they're doing, blah, blah, blah. And so my process for screening these is like, can I feel a human in this? And do I feel the presence of someone, either their assistant or themselves, where there's like, you know, actually an interest to do something beyond just tell their story. And so Sébastien was one of the people when I wrote back, you know, the nice thing is usually it's one email from me and then filters people out where I'm like, look, this is what we're actually up to here. This is the plan. This is the process. Is this something the person's interested in? Sébastien was a yes to that. So I think I'm not going to share any more until we get them on. So Sébastien, I'll get you to turn on your camera and your mic. There we go. Kerpow. Showing me up with your suit, right. Your fabulous style. It's outrageous, but we're going to let it slide.
You know, I wear suits because it's simple for me. I never know if I'm going to have to meet a client or give a talk. My schedule's chaotic. So I figured I'd take away the decision. I'm just wearing a suit every day. That's it. So here we are.
Barack Obama of you. I'd heard like that one of his processes for reducing decision fatigue is basically have like an outfit that he wore, and then he didn't have to put energy towards thinking about that.
Adam, you'll never guess how many copies of this blue shirt I have. If you looked at my closet, it's about 20. I just don't like making those decisions every day. I eat the same salad at every lunchtime. So here we are. You have the most boring person in the world on your podcast today.
So I have a quick question. It's a bit unrelated, but for me, clothing, perhaps not represented today, but is like a bit of a palette on which I express my art. I like aesthetic, style. I like, you know, I don't get to wear a lot of suits these days, but I really enjoyed matching a shirt with a tie cleverly and then a pocket square. That was a real delight for me. So obviously suits, that's not that for you, but what is a version of that you do in your life?
Well, to express my creativity, it's all about writing. You know, compared to how you describe how you approach clothing, I'm like the exact opposite. I love my routines. They simplify my life. They take decisions out. I exercise every day. Last year on my Strava, 365 days. Some days are pretty chill, like 30 minutes slow on the treadmill. But that also takes out all the decision. There's no debate with myself what I'm going to wear, most of the time what I'm going to eat, although that's harder for me, you know, whether I'm going to exercise or not. I just love those routines that simplify and automate my life. I have a really stressful day job and, you know, it helps me. So I express myself by writing. I just absolutely love this. I do this on my free time. I do this as part of my work, and it's an absolute passion for me. I'm a little bummed out about what's going on with AI from that perspective.
Yes,
I'm an AI optimist, but I used to think like I have this edge. I can write. It's a nice way to express myself. I would struggle over a sentence, a paragraph, and derive satisfaction. And now AI, you know, you just give it rough notes.
Yes.
And everybody can write well. It's getting so good. So I don't know, like, there's no edge anymore. It's a different way of thinking to use an AI to write. But anyways, I'm going on a tangent right away. Right from the beginning, I'm going on a tangent.
Fantastic. Yeah, like what I notice about that is that the art of curating, which is something we all do, even if it's just internally, like, is this for me or not, is becoming more nuanced and more, we have to be more sophisticated if we want to curate. That requires decision-making and thoughtfulness. And so a lot of people, I think, are just like, I can't be bothered. Whatever. This AI article is the same as what Sébastien or Adam have written. That's fine. And then there'll probably be a niche of people for which it becomes even more important because of that fact. So yeah, it's a fascinating area.
Changes the whole game. But your question was about how I express myself. For me, it's artful to turn a phrase in a way that's clever, that expresses who I am and how I think.
Yes.
Just like, you know, your outfit expresses who you are and to a certain extent how you think. But that's, you know, is it going away? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time. Well, tell it. So you mentioned stressful day job. We'll end up there, but like, give us like some of the high watermarks or the sort of high touch points of like, how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Before I do that, Adam, I want to reflect on your intro
Please do.
because there are three ways in which it resonated with me. First of all, I'm going to set a goal today. I know you said you want to embrace the grief and
Mm,
live in the grief, but we're going to cheer you up today. At the end, I want you to smile and cheer up. So that's my goal I'm setting for myself. But I'll
okay,
give,
I'm going to qualify that for you then,
yeah,
which is I'm 100% here to be in the experience and expression of joy, and I also really hold the heartbreak as very sacred and not necessarily something in exclusion to the joy. So
yep.
if you're looking for me to shift to a state of joy, um,
Away
absent
from, not necessarily
heartbreak, then
away
that's
from the
not going
grief.
to be, I'm not a yes to that, but I'm totally down to have a great time with you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And the three areas where this resonated with me and ultimately with parts of the psychology of leadership, the book. First of all, you're very mindful of your emotions, of your emotional state. And there's a meta component to that, and a lot of people are not. Second, you talked about in your intro your self talk and how you were asking yourself, am I grieving the right way?
Hmm.
And for me, in my growth, self talk was a big part of it. I was stressed at work
Uh-huh.
and I was stressing about stressing. And
Yes, of
I
course.
kept asking myself, why are you stressed? You've been doing this for 25 years. Why are you reacting that way? So this idea of the self-talk being a component of how you're approaching this situation, it's also been part of my journey. And
Mm.
third, like you took a pause to drink coffee. I drink 4 a day. And it just resonated with me. Like you're in a live podcast, but the sip of coffee is still important in your life. And I think we connected there as well. So
Yes,
I
indeed.
just wanted to take a second to reflect on your introduction because if you've never had pets, it might not necessarily resonate. It took us a long time as a family before we got pets. We did during COVID, and now our cat and our dog. It really, you have to live it to understand
Yes,
how they're essentially family members.
well said.
So, on my career, 25 years in the rough and tumble world of money management, I started as an unpaid intern, French speaking immigrant from Canada at a global bank. And I had a phenomenal career, lots of ups and downs. But
Did
I
you
ended
know
up
this was what you wanted to point towards, like at the start?
the career in money management,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
Aha, got it. So you just came kind of formed in that regard.
Yes, and Adam, my father was a finance professor. I
Aha, it's
I
kind of in your
grew
blood.
up I grew up around this conversations at the dinner table. He never pushed me in that direction, but he led by example. He had so
Aha.
much passion for finance and money management. It was my calling. It is my calling. I ended up being the youngest senior managing director in the history of that global bank. I switched companies twice. My career has been, again, lots of ups and downs, but now I'm chief investment officer at a global asset manager, T. Rowe Price. We manage over 1.7 trillion, if you can believe it,
It's a lot of
8,000
money.
employees, 20 different countries. And I love what I do. But the critical moment, Adam, going back to your intro, was this self talk. I was stressed at work. It was starting to show at home. And I usually don't talk about my work at home, but
Uh-huh.
my wife picked up on the stress.
How old
And
were you at the time when this started to show up?
so maybe 4.5, 5 years ago, I'm
Uh,
48 now.
Okay, okay. So this sort of like you were able to maybe withstand or hold it in or kind of cope or whatever word you would use for a good chunk of time, like up into your 40s.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a stressful career, and I've always had fairly high neuroticism. If you look at personality testing, I'll score high on that. So
Right.
I'm what you might call an anxious achiever, but I've always kept it below. If you think of a speedometer on a car,
Yep.
and where it's in the green and then it's in the orange and then you go into the red and you're revving too much.
Yes.
I've never had clinical anxiety, but I was going into the red and this was an uncomfortable level. So to your question, it's not like at 44 years old, all of a sudden I became stressed, but
Right.
I was for the first time really going into the red and stressing about stressing. I ended up talking to a sports psychologist where I live in Maryland. His name is Dr. Daniel Zimmett. And he coaches professional baseball players, NFL players, Olympic athletes. And he's a super interesting person because he also holds 40 national titles in the sport of handball, which,
cool.
Adam, this is like squash, but you're actually playing the ball with your hands.
Yes, there's a Lewis Howes. Is that his name? He's quite well known in sort of leadership circles as a handball champion. Also, sidebar, love that you mentioned my favorite sport of all time, squash. Please continue.
Yeah, I can play a little squash, but I'm not going to challenge you. I'm just going to put it that way. And we're going to talk about sports psychology, but Dr. Daniel Zimmett is a PhD psychologist, and it's fascinating because he's also a pro athlete and has his mental game in practice figured out, not just in theory. So we sit down, and I wanted to learn about sports psychology.
Can I ask you some? Can I interject with some questions?
Yeah.
What's the because so I really get you're very brilliant, and like, that sort of thinking about your thinking, stressing about your stressing, that's very common of brilliant people, right? We find our way out of problems by thinking, and then if the problem is thinking, we try to think out of thinking, and so on and so forth. So I could imagine that there was maybe some process by which that was the cycle you were in. What was the thing that had you actually go and seek support outside of yourself? What was the catalyst there, the circumstance? What had that become available or your choice?
It's a much simpler answer than you might expect.
Yay.
My wife. She said, just go, like, this is not productive for you, this level of stress. And I never take my work home because to me, it's my sanctuary. So I go into battle, and I shouldn't describe my work as a battle, but sometimes it's the level of stress that's comparable to going into battle.
Sure.
I get home, I cross the door, and work is left behind. And so 25 years, she maybe has a very vague idea of what I'm doing in life. But at that time, it was seeping in. I wasn't sleeping as well. And she was the trigger. She was the one who nudged me.
So she started to notice it and was just like, yo, you gotta do something. Off you
go. Exactly. And I actually describe a bit of that in the introduction to the psychology of leadership. Now, the story Zimmett told me to introduce me.
Hold on, I have one more question.
Go ahead.
Was it challenging for you to, because that's a bit of a humbling experience, part of one of the things I know about people that are quite smart is that we like to have things figured out by ourselves or be able to figure out. And there's a humility in, someone seeing something we can't or perhaps won't. Did you experience any conflict internally, any challenge in just taking what your wife brought to you?
No, cool. I did not. I think at that point in my life, I had already realized that vulnerability sometimes is strength. And we confuse that. Saying things like, I don't know. It's hard for a leader or an expert in finance to say, I don't know.
Indeed.
Or saying things like, I'm not feeling well. But if you look back, the people who have the ability to say these things, they're generally stronger, more self-confident people. I mean, I'm sounding a bit like Brené Brown here. She's great. She's fantastic. And that's the idea. So
The
no, it wasn't embarrassing or something I tried to hide that I was too stressed and I was looking for a solution. Not at all.
the only caveat I'd put in there is, of course, everything you've just shared, like you said, right? Brene Brown, we know, right? The leaders that thrive best are the ones that can say, I don't know, that can practice vulnerability. But of course, knowing that is always different from practicing it in the moment, which is really where the edge lies. But it sounds like, at least in this instance, if you had known this for a while, it sounds almost like your wife saying this was like, okay, it's time to actually honor what I already know. Is that a fair way to kind of put it?
Yeah, Adam, it was a journey. We describe it as a moment. It was an
Mm-hmm.
important moment, but it was a culmination of a journey. Year one
Uh-huh.
in my career, my mentor said, Seb, you're a worrier. What are we going to do about this?
And
Right.
you said,
So
I'll worry about it.
there was a progression of ups and downs and becoming more self-aware over time and having such a great spouse, such a great person living with me and helping me with that. And we help each other. I was ready for that.
Uh-huh.
Um, I was not expecting the conversation to begin the way it did
Uh-huh.
on
So
sports
let's go there
psychology.
now, because I took you on a digression, but now we're back to where you were in your process.
Well, he sits me down and he decides that he's going to tell me the story of his best handball match ever. And the fascinating thing is, the match took place 10 years prior, and he remembers every single point.
Mm.
For every point, he remembers where the ball was. It's fascinating. He's telling me it hit that wall, then it bounced that way. And he goes, there's emotion. There's almost like a tear in his eyes. At some point, I'm on my knees. I make an extreme shot I didn't think I could ever make. The crowd's going crazy. I'm on the edge of my seat.
Uh-huh.
And
I
then
was
it's
going to ask if you're enjoying the story, if you're like, okay, but where does this lead?
yeah, it's like
Yeah,
I don't know if you read the book Open by Andre Agassi, but he describes some of his key tennis matches, and it's one of the best memoirs ever written in my mind.
I've heard.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like that. He's describing this match, but then it's the biggest letdown because nonchalant, he goes, and then I lost the next 2 points. And
Mm-hmm.
I interrupt and I go, wait, you lost that match. So that was your best match ever, but you
Mm-hmm.
lost it. It was the perfect introduction to the concept of ego versus mastery. That's how he wanted to introduce sports psychology to me.
Mm.
Ego is about the score, whether you win or lose the match. Mastery in sports psychology is about the fact that that day on the court, Dr. Daniel Zimmett realized that he was now able to play the game at a much higher level. And from a mastery mindset, that was the most critical moment in his handball career because he was playing a much stronger opponent. So
Uh-huh.
we talk about ego versus mastery, and we end up looking at how to build resilience into this and how to think about losing. And
When
then
you
I
say
start,
we talk about you and Dr. Zimmett.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
And then, I'm a nerd. I do financial economics research nerd. I publish articles in journals, dealing with referees, the whole academic thing.
Yeah.
So I start reading the papers in sports psychology, which have nothing to do with quantitative finance. And I get completely fascinated. I go down the rabbit hole, start researching. I hire Zimmett as a consultant. I start writing again. I said at the onset, I'm a habit person,
Yes.
writing 3 hours every Saturday morning and 1 to 2 every Sunday, and
So I
learning and writing. And that's how I ended up with the book.
Okay, so I want to come to that, but first you go to see Dr. Zimmett because of this anxiety on top of anxiety, so on and so forth. He shares this with you. Can you unfold a little bit or unpack a little bit your process by which like the things I'm curious about, you start to put this into action so as to bring your anxiety down. And I'm also really interested in, like, where did you find that challenging, or where did you come up against your own resistance in that process?
So, mastery versus ego was an important opening concept because the ego is the part that creates the stress. oh, we lost money in markets today. What are people going to think of me as a money manager?
Yeah.
Or I'm having a tough interaction with someone in my organization and I'm embarrassed and my ego is hurt, versus I'm getting better at what I do. The short-term outcome doesn't necessarily matter. And or I'm learning from this setback, and therefore from a mastery perspective, setbacks are good. This is amazing about sports psychology. It's not about winning at all. Sports psychologists like barely care about like whether the winning, which is how you would.
It's a byproduct of, rather than the sort of driving force.
Absolutely. And the obsession, quote unquote, of sports psychology is losing, because that's where you grow. That's where you learn. So starting to think of challenges in my professional life that way was very helpful. The other thing, Adam, key, and I ended up writing a couple chapters on this in the book, is the idea in sports in particular, but in life also, that up to a certain point, stress increases performance. Now, let me just pause here and get your thoughts on this. What's your like knee-jerk reaction to that statement?
Well, I would think that would be almost knee-jerk would be like it's kind of self-evident.
Yeah.
And then the follow-on thought would be like, but probably not to a lot of people, because we have a relationship to stress that stress equals bad. But, if you think about going to the gym, it's only through stress that the muscle reaches the point where it then needs to heal to grow stronger, et cetera, et cetera. We have to expend some energy in the short term to create something new.
Yeah. It's the excess of stress that's very unhealthy. I mean, extremely unhealthy. It'll mess up your sleep, your appetite, your mood, your, it'll kill you ultimately, chronic stress.
Yes.
But in sports, it's been studied, and in other areas of high performance, that up to a point, it will increase performance, after which performance will decrease.
Yes.
Think of it as an inverted U.
Yeah.
And this is called a Yerkes-Dodson's curve, Yerkes Dodson's. And to me, this was key, because I remember having that conversation with Dr. Zimmett and saying, hey, I'm stressed. And he goes, well, you need some stress to perform better. And that response was really important for me. And I started digging into it and looking into it.
Normalized it a bit.
It normalized it. It reduced a bit of that self-talk where I go, why am I so stressed? I shouldn't be so stressed. I've done this for 25 years. And you look at sports, and it's fascinating, because if I give you a challenge to run a 100-meter dash, for example, and you're completely relaxed about it, you're not going to run as fast as if you're anxious about how you're going to perform.
Again, up to a certain degree.
Up to a certain degree, but a 100-meter dash is such a simple task that you do want to rev up the adrenaline. Sports psychologists will reframe this as activation. It's less negative than stress. For more complicated tasks, your optimal functioning is not zero stress, but it might be at a lower point. So archery is an example where it requires more concentration. Heart rate must be lower. But physically, stress increases your body's ability to focus and perform. If someone's going to perform surgery on you, Adam, do you want them like super chill? Zero stress level? Or do you want them a little anxious about it, so they double check the scans and they focus more on the task at hand? I think it's the latter.
Well, you've given me a new question to start asking my surgeons, is like, please rate your chill status between super chill and a little anxious. But so no disagreement or conflict or whatever over here with anything you're putting into the space. The theory fully aligned with. Where I find most, if not all of this stuff falls down, is that the theory is easy, so to speak, relatively speaking. The theory we can hold in our mind, and in our mind, we're not actually having to put the rubber to the pavement. I'm really interested to hear. I imagine hearing this at first would be a relief, like, oh my God, this is amazing. But I also imagine that from your existing relationship to stress or anxiety or worry or all of that, you've one, been using it as fuel to excel or to do what you do. Two, you are in an environment that reflects that back to you. So like acknowledges the hard work, sort of almost asks for that stress. And three, that putting that theory into practice is going to come into conflict with that environment that you've created to some extent. It's not going to be just as easy as, oh, I realized I don't have to worry as much. I stopped worrying, hunky dory. And so tell me, or tell us a little bit about where the rubber hit the pavement and what was bumpy about that for you.
Well, it's never easy. And I can hear people in our audience right now screaming like, "Hey dude, don't tell me to be less stressed. That's not helpful." You know?
My
So we have
audience
to
often
be
says dude a lot. So you're right on the money.
we have to be realistic about the practice versus the concepts. And I like how you frame the difference. And if you think about my journey, I wrote this book about self-improvement and leadership, but I'm a full-time executive.
Yes.
So I have to deal with the practice aspect. I'm not just writing theory.
Yeah.
So in the book, I'm actually telling stories of practice and how this works or doesn't in my experience. And then I lean on research as well. So that's why I love that question. You have to develop practices that will help, and you can improve your Yerkes-Dodson's curve. In other words, deliver more performance at lower stress levels. And there are practical ways of doing this, which I'm sure you talk about, Adam, with, breathing exercises and sleep and diet and hitting the gym every day and just looking after yourself so that you build up your stress tolerance. The acceptance itself in the moment, I'm feeling stressed. That's okay. It's going to help me perform better. I'm about to go on stage. I'm feeling stressed. I'm feeling anxious. That's okay. I'm going to perform better. So there's a self-talk component, since we started the discussion with self-talk, that becomes quite useful.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not underestimate the impact of all of this. And the way you put it is, I think, I don't know if you use these words, anxious achiever, but yes, the stress, the anxiety has been part of how I've delivered high performance over time.
Well said.
If I have to go on live national TV, which I do for my day job, to talk about investment views, and I don't know what they're going to ask, and I'm going to have 2 minutes to make a point, and all my colleagues are going to watch, there's no way I'm not going to have a stress response to that. But I've learned right before I go in the air, no one notices, I do 4x4 box breathing.
Mm-hmm.
I inhale for 4 seconds, I hold for 4 seconds, I exhale for 4 seconds, and I hold at the bottom for 4 seconds. That helps tremendously. And you can get in flow once you're in the air, on the air, or once you're on the stage. Your brain, Adam, is 2% of your body mass, 20% of your calorie expenditure.
Mm-hmm.
Just let that sink in for a moment, how important that is. Chess players famously in a tournament will burn 6,000 calories in a day. I don't even know. I'm a runner. I don't even know how to burn 6,000, how to get to 6,000 calories. So these things really matter. Reframing into activation from stress, finding your optimal functioning point. It's hard when you want to be close to the optimal functioning. It means you'll always be not too far from the too much stress part of the curve.
But we're still in the realm of theory to an extent here. So I got, you learned box breathing as an example and to practice that, which is awesome. The danger I'm present to is people hear this and are like, oh, I got to learn a technique, maybe some mindset, maybe think about this stuff differently. And once I've done that, I apply it and then I get to have a different experience. I want to share my experience of how a real shift happens, like what it's like going through that. And then see if you can share anything that's along those lines, and you may not. That's okay if it's not your experience. But for example, part of the thing I see a lot is people are worried about, if I put myself out there, if I stop censoring myself, people are going to have an experience. They're going to tell me that I'm stupid and that I'm dumb and that my work is blah, 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 blah. And I'm going to feel horrible, and I don't want to do that. And so they've created this pattern in their life. Your pattern was worrying about worrying, as often mine can be. Their pattern was like censor themselves so that they don't rock the boat, blah, blah, blah. Then we could sit down, we could have a mindset conversation with them where they shift the way that they're looking at their expression. We could change it sort of analogously from the goal of your expression is how other people see it, to mastery of your expression is that you are putting what's out here or in here out there, and that you feel great about that. So now we've created a mindset shift, and we could give them some practices. The challenge, though, remains that if they're really putting themselves out there and practicing the mastery you describe, and if they're meeting the world in such a way that the world's abundance can show up, they're going to come across some people that are like, your expression sucks and you're dumb. Some people, they're going to feed them the very thing that they've devoted their life to avoiding. That is going to be a point where they have resistance, where they're going to try to protect or guard or whatever. And I hear all the places where you've successfully applied this, but I'm really left wondering, what has your resistance looked like? Or are you able, maybe it's just not even kind of conscious for you. Are there moments where you've noticed yourself, even though you have this shift in mindset, guarding against something or protecting or running into something that you rather wouldn't be there?
I mean, Adam, all the time. I have these theoretical concepts that I understand that have helped me with techniques in my mindset, and on the margin brought me back from the redlining on the speedometer down and has helped me perform optimally. But I have struggles all the time where the intellectual, I think that's where you're driving to, the intellectual understanding of a sports psychology concept didn't translate into me feeling or performing better or handling a situation better. On the margin, it'll help, but I'm human, Adam. It's not like and I think a lot of people oversell mindset solutions and such on social media, where it's going to transform your life and you're going to be able to handle any tough situation.
Yes.
And you're going to be like Neil Armstrong. I love that story. If you can humor me for a few seconds, I use the story of Neil.
Starting stopwatch.
Okay. How many seconds do I have to tell the story of Neil Armstrong?
As many as you need. You go ahead.
Let's start it. It's like such an example of what we should strive to in terms of, stress curves. So famously, the moon landing mission went completely wrong. They lost connection with Earth. The computer malfunctioned. They ran out of fuel. They went off course. Armstrong had to take manual command. He landed the thing in the wrong spot. First manned moon landing, famous moment in human history. He steps out, goes one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. One of the critical moment in human history. By the way, I talked about this in a podcast, and I looked at the comments, and a few comments were about, does Sébastien really think this happened? So apparently it's controversial whether it happened or not. I'm going to abstract from that and assume we did land on the moon. Are you with me on that we landed on the moon for the record?
Okay. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
So he was hooked to a heart rate monitor, and his heart rate spiked when he landed. But for most of the mission, what would you guess was his heart rate during all this, like, most stressful moment in history, you could say?
Well, given the framing you've provided me, I'm gonna account for that and guess sort of like 50, 60, somewhere in that baseline.
It was 75, which, like, for him might have been a slightly elevated, but for a lot of people, it's like close to resting heart rate.
Pretty chill, yeah.
Like normal walk around heart rate.
Yeah.
So we have someone who had a lot of repetition in stress situations, and who had maybe was kind of wired that way, but also who had just remarkable optimal functioning under stress. And we kind of, I use that as an example of a North Star, but we can't all be like Neil Armstrong. What I want to say, Adam, about this is, in terms of the practice of it, is that different people have different stress curves. And if you're a leader and you manage a team, it's super important to develop the empathy to know that some people on your team are going to perform much better under pressure and others won't. And if you get to know people and develop the empathy, as a leader, your role is to help people maximize their own individual performances. It's no longer about you, really, once you're in a leadership role. Well, developing that empathy, knowing that some people will react differently to pressure, some will increase their performance, others will be on the other side of the stress curve, is a practical application of that framework. I also use it in terms of goals, whether it's personal goals or organizational goals. If you know that there's a certain stress level or activation level for the organization or for you where performance is maximized, and if you know that the idea that walking around in life striving to have zero stress is unrealistic and unproductive, because first of all, it's impossible. It's part of the human condition to feel some stress. Then you can calibrate goals, right? Do I make it super hard and impossible to reach? Or is this goal too easy? And how can I calibrate the goal to help my team, myself, get closer to this optimal functioning? You also talk about fear of other people's opinion. If you
Well, let me slow us
go
down.
ahead.
So I want to just be candid. I'm still not clear of an actual situation where you ran into your own resistance, but that's okay. Let's move off of that. I got that you have them. I'm clear you shared that, but let's move off of that. Can we talk a little bit about your notion of goal-induced blindness? Because I think there's like something really fascinating about that concept. Would you be willing to elucidate a bit on that?
Oh, absolutely. But Adam, let me ask you a question. What would be an example for you of where you overcame your own resistance? And maybe that'll help me come up with one.
Sure. Yeah, there's one in particular. Well, it's really more a story of my resistance and then the bungling on the other side of it. So as I started into, leadership, transformational work, one of the pieces of feedback I got a lot was that there was a really put together, polished version of myself I presented to people, and none of that came out. So it was very interior. I had feelings, thoughts, whatever. And so some of the ways I was invited, one, I was given sort of mindset shifts, different ways to frame or hold that in, instead of they're going to think I'm dumb. Instead, maybe it'd be like, hey, what about an opportunity to practice connecting with other human beings? And so the practice I started to engage with was sharing more of what was there for me. And there was, that on its own sounds great. But of course, I have calibrated my life to share nothing. So I've become very good at almost like damming a river. There's all of this water coming, but none of it gets through. I don't have any calibration. And so one of the situations, like one of the places I can remember being at a bus stop, seeing someone who I went to law school with, feeling like, oh, they don't know me, all of the conversation, looking at my phone, finding any reason other than to talk to them, and eventually deciding I'm going to go and sit down next to this person on the bus. I'm going to talk to them. It went amazing. So cool. That's a great example where things went the way that we'd hoped they would. The other example would be that I was in a networking situation, and I was listening to someone speak, and I noticed that I was starting to get bored of them talking, and I was like, okay, I'm going to practice. I'm going to put myself out there, even though I didn't really want to. And in crossing that threshold and sharing that with them, they got very upset with me because I was very unartful in sharing any of what I was sharing. It came out like a blurt. It landed all over them, and they they basically told me to fuck right off and move on. So those are two situations where I was crossing the threshold of my resistance. One where huzzah, it worked, and the other where it led me towards the next place to practice, but it was anything but smooth or easy or anything along those lines.
Okay, that's super helpful. So for me, the resistance earlier in my career, similar, would have been having tough conversations.
Mm,
Not good at it. Um, did not enjoy, still don't enjoy having tough conversations, but they're critical, especially when they relate to feedback for an underperformer.
mm,
And I had all the resistance in the world from this internal, I don't want to have that conversation. I'm going to kick the can down the road, to sitting down with underperformers in particular. And this has been a theme in my career as a leader. You have to give tough feedback sometimes. Sometimes you have to fire people.
yes.
And I would fire people way too late.
Mm,
You do it and you think, oh, I should have done that 18 months ago. This was
uh-huh.
hurting the team. So that's an example for me over time of having to learn to overcome that resistance between the internal dialogue and an external expression of it. And the
Mm,
consequences are that I think ultimately it improved my leadership, but it has not been easy for me.
uh-huh. I would imagine on the other side of being able to let people go sooner, that that would actually alleviate some of the stress you'd feel, given you're taking the action that you know is there to take.
Yeah. And the short term, easy thing to do is to delay the tough conversation.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. What I'll ask this question and then we'll go to goal-induced blindness. What was like the story or the belief or like the internal conversation about letting people go that had you resisting doing so?
Maybe they'll get better. Maybe they'll
Mm,
improve. Maybe I don't need to have that conversation.
uh-huh.
People are talented anyways. They're just going through a tough period and just procrastinating because those discussions are very difficult and they circle back to something else you said, fear of other people's opinion,
Yes. Yeah.
you know? And it's difficult in the workplace or in teams in general, or even in families, to give feedback that needs to be given, that must be given, but that is going to be very difficult. So what you do, you just delay, 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 kick the can,
Yeah.
hope they'll get better. And, honestly, I'm still doing it a little bit,
Yeah.
it'll come up in my own 360 reviews. Seb needs to get better at having the tough conversations. But I like to think that I've improved, but
Yes.
that might be the most practical example, Adam, of just internal resistance and working to overcome it in the
Yeah.
professional side.
Thanks for sharing, man. I can see myself in that. The thing I find probably one of the things most challenging is there's no right way to have a difficult conversation and no right time for it. And my brain loves to figure out the right way because if I did it right, then there's no self-doubt. It's all handled and packaged, and I'm beyond reproach. And those conversations, those moments are we just got to have them, and they happen the way they happen, and that's how it is.
Yeah, and sometimes, you over prepare, they might say this, they might say that. I'm going
Yeah,
to have all the
I've got
data
a flow
and
chart here.
yeah, how the conversation might go this way, that way. You rehearse it in your mind. And yeah,
Yes.
that in part is going to help you with the conversation, but it's also a bit stressful. And I also would say for me, part of the resistance is I like to think I have calm under pressure,
Uh-huh.
but if it's a tough conversation, I worry that that my stress is going to show.
Mm,
And I don't
I
want my
see.
stress to show. I got to be calm and tell the person that we're parting ways. I'm firing them
Uh-huh.
in a way that's very calm and collected. So part of the kicking the can down the road is being worried that my voice is going to shake or my heart is going to pound, and I'm not going to. I'm not going to come across as calm as I should in that kind of situation.
Yes. Yeah, that's so human. Okay, well, tell us about goal-induced blindness. Like I kind of intuitively have a sense of this, but maybe you can elaborate on this concept.
In the literature in psychology, it's simply described as an obsession, often with a measurable goal, I want to reach the summit of Everest, which leads to blindness on anything that's not goal related in your life.
Mm.
In the Everest example, which is used in the literature in psychology, climbers will sacrifice their own safety. That's goal-induced blindness. All they care about is the summit, and they're taking unreasonable risk. Now, did you know that if you want to climb Everest, reach the summit, you have a 4% chance of dying in the process?
And you got to go past the bodies that have died too.
Yeah, frozen body. Got to walk over. I mean, you know, I did this experiment with a group of ambitious finance students. This was one of the biggest crowds I'd had in years. It's like almost 1,000 students. And I asked them as a thought experiment, if I have a jar of gummies that has 4 of them that are poisoned, they're going to kill you. What would I have to do to convince you to eat one of them? And my point was about goal-induced blindness associated with money. These are all well-off students. They're all going to be successful. They're nowhere near the poverty line.
Yeah.
And I offer $1 million and I get very few hands. 10 million, 100 million, I got 25% of the room.
Wow.
And to me, that was like, you're having goal-induced blindness right now about money. You know, it's just a thought experiment, but it's important in business because good companies will do bad things. Wells Fargo, for example, famously started creating dummy bank accounts because the goal was to create as many bank accounts as possible.
Right.
Which led to misreporting. And this is a great company. Like Volkswagen cheated on their emissions scandal.
Right. Yeah.
You know, there are plenty of examples, not just the Enrons and the WorldCom and the complete like accounting fraud scandals. Goal-induced blindness can happen. I had it in my life, Adam, at the beginning of my career. I was so overworked, traveling nonstop, not sleeping well, not eating well. I got an infection and they couldn't diagnose it. It was probably some version of strep. I spent a week in the hospital, and at the end, the surgeon came and well, we kept the surgeon away. I didn't have any long-term effects from this. They wanted to do surgery, but it's a long story. It's in the book, actually. But at the end, the doctor said, not the surgeon, the doctor said, you know, Seb, we gave you some antibiotics that we didn't have a few years ago. So you're lucky because you wouldn't have made it. And that was just like being completely run down. And it turns out I went running. I had some cuts in my toes. I was running to try to get better, get back on track. And some bacteria just attacked, you know. That was like all caused by just not taking care of myself.
So we've got examples of what goal-induced blindness is and what it can lead to. How do you, aside from just pointing to it and being like, that's goal-induced blindness, like how do you work with this in your own development of leadership? How do you put this into action beyond simply using it as a distinction?
You put in place systems that will flash red lights, raise alarm bells when you slip into goal-induced blindness. There are plenty of those systems. A lot of companies will have, for example, a whistleblower line. And that's a system that's in place when things start to slip. People can go on an anonymous basis and disclose like this is happening. But there are multiple versions of goal-induced blindness. It's having a system in place that will tell you, you know, whoops, this is not good. I've always struggled with my diet, for example. I'm doing pretty good on sleep, pretty good on exercise. Diet's a bit harder. Well, I have now a system that I just go on an app and count my calories. And, you know, like yesterday I got an extra 1,000 calories that was like, you know, 1,000 calories above target. So just having systems in place to see it. So if you're an Everest climber, right? The person who has the world record has over 30 summits. You know what they're really good at? quitting.
Right.
So developing the skill to quit really helps. Knowing when, oh, I've invested so much in this, but this is now goal-induced blindness. And the ability to quit is such a prized and underrated leadership and business skill. Kudos to Annie Duke for this. I don't know if you've had her on your show. She's an expert on decision-making under uncertainty.
This is the poker player, right?
Yeah.
No, I haven't. A fantastic idea, though.
Ex-poker player. She wrote a book titled Quit. She wrote a book titled Thinking in Bets. I was so happy that she endorsed The Psychology of Leadership. She wrote a blurb for it because I'm a huge fan. If you think about it in money management, decision-making under uncertainty is what we do for a living. And she happens to be an expert at that.
Yes.
So everyone in my team has read her books, but kudos to her, like around goal-induced blindness and the ability to quit when it's time to quit, especially if you're climbing Everest. My view on Everest, by the way, I'd love to hear yours, is don't go. Don't, I have this at the end. I have 18 principles in the book. At the end of every chapter, I have a little quip, something about that's a little funnier or trying to keep my reader engaged. And at the end of one chapter, I go, if you take one piece of advice from this entire book, don't try to climb Everest. What do you think?
Regarding climbing Everest in particular?
Yeah.
Well, let me share a thought that came forward and then I'll tie it back to Everest. I experience people having one of two primary ways by which a goal, kind of what we're talking about, gets sabotaged or sabotages them. One is a sort of, we could call it goal-induced blindness. At the expense of their own intuition, at the expense of their own ability to discern, like, is this still actually what I want? Is this actually serving the greater picture? They become very myopic. The other version that I see is where the concern is, I'm not reliable to do this. So there's self-doubt in their willingness to do it. And so then instead of, this is kind of what gets in the way of some of what you described, is they're like, I need to focus on the goal and I need to not look at the reasons why not. I need to not look at, and so what happens is they sort of believe, if I don't look at what's scary, it can't scare me, and then I'll do the thing. And what happens is then they get T-boned, they get blindsided by it, and they're completely without any inoculation. They haven't put anything in front. So for me, the pithy, I love your pithy answer, right? Don't do it. That's very nice and succinct. I'll take the privilege then of being a little more pedantic and say, if you're going to go to Everest, make sure that you look at everything, like make sure what would you want to do in your life to accommodate a 4% chance that you're going to die in the next year? What are the things you would want to take care of? What are the things you'd want to blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to digress here briefly to describe, I can't remember who wrote The Way of Aikido, but he came up with this game called the Samurai Game. And in the Samurai Game, you and a group of people basically role play samurai going into war against one another. And the idea was that samurai knew that in order to go into a battle fully prepared, you have to die first. Because if you don't do that, then you are going to be worried that you will die. And you're like, I don't want to die. I've got my kids, I've got my family, I've got this, I've got that project not finished. And that gets in the way of you being able to fully give yourself over to what you are there to do. And so when you play this samurai game, whilst you're only pretending that you're going to fight, you are doing everything that you would do knowing you're going to your death. And so the lead up to this game, which ultimately is kind of silly, is you write the letters to your loved ones and you do all of the things you would do to put your affairs in order. And so I think if someone's going to go to Everest, do what you have to do to die, embrace that 4%. And then, then the choice is a lot more sober. You're actually making it from a more at choice place than otherwise. So there you go. There's my answer.
I love that take. That's a super interesting philosophical way of thinking about it. It speaks to risk management. When we manage money, we always have a worst case scenario. How much can we lose
yes.
in a given year? It's kind of similar to that. And it also
Yeah.
gets philosophical because I think Stoic philosophy goes after that as well,
Yes.
thinking about death and worst case scenario. And Seneca writes about the worst case scenario. You
Yes.
know, I like to use the example of Simone Biles because famously in the 2021 Tokyo Olympics, she walked out, right? Top
Mhm.
gymnast in the world,
Right.
walked out. And that was not like a consensus that everybody was happy or proud of her for walking out. It was a bit
Yes.
controversial. She had the
Costly.
twisties. Huh?
It was costly. Like there was an
Yeah.
energetic or a relation, all of the, there was cost to that. It wasn't free for her to do that.
Yeah, and she had the twisties, so she would do the flips in the air and kind of lose her sense of where she was. And in gymnastics, that's usually overtraining or anxiety related. Basically, goal-induced blindness, relates to overtraining quite a bit for athletes. I like to say though, she realized that she came back in 2023 and won 4 world gold medals.
Yes.
I like to say that Simone Biles got better at gymnastics by watching Netflix on Sundays
I
because
love it.
that's how she put, like she said, from
Yes.
now on she was overtrained, goal induced blindness, and she was like, from now on I'm watching Netflix, going to church on Sundays, whatever. And also she would tweet about how she had had a good night's sleep the night before, right? So overtraining, overdoing it, goal induced blindness. Every top athlete knows, especially if you're a runner and you're training for a marathon, for example, that rest is part of the process in delivering higher performance.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's kind of lost sometimes in high performers.
Well, and I think it's again, we all know it, right? Like it's sort of like this adage, money can't buy happiness. We know it. We know it in our minds. But my experience working with like high net worth people, the only way you can move that from an intellectual knowing to actually earned wisdom is to live it. We have to cross the threshold. And so it's almost like we have to experience the breakdown that happens when we think we need rest and don't listen to it to fully understand, oh crap, I got to rest. And it requires a lot of courage to cross that too. What is it? Simone Biles? Is that her
Yeah.
name? Yeah. To her, incredible credit. Like what a courageous move. And I love, it's so nice that there's a nice bow on that. She comes back and absolutely crushes it. Let me ask you this, Sebastian. What what would you say is your philosophy on people at its root? How do you like, when you're talking about leadership, what basic assumptions about people do you start with?
People need to be empowered.
Hmm.
Intrinsic motivation comes from having a sense that you're controlling your fate, that you're controlling the work that you're doing. And they also, related to that, need to be held accountable. That's
Uh-huh.
the other side of being empowered.
The teeth.
But we have a crisis of engagement in work in America. If you look at the surveys, it's like 60, 70% of employees will say, I am not engaged in my work.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is solved through empowerment and accountability. My philosophy also is one of total transparency and communication. I write an email update on everything I've been up to during the week, basically my personal notes. I
Mm.
edit them a little bit
Yeah.
to my entire leadership team every Friday. I don't miss a week. And that is to me sort of this radical aspect of transparency of what's going on. You have to be careful sometimes because sometimes there's material, non-public information, there are all sorts of things you actually can't say. But
Yes.
I err on the side of communicating. And on leadership also, I just think after having published the psychology of leadership and the work that went into it, it's not what most people think.
What's not what most people think?
Leadership itself, I
Oh,
don't think
yes.
of
Yeah.
it, people think of it as you have to be an inspiring figure and a strong speech giver. And I can
Have
give a
good
speech.
ideas.
So that's been my bias. But it's
Yes.
it's all about listening. It's your listening skills. And it's not about you. It's about making the team work better. It's about helping people get the most out of their abilities, which Adam, I know you do coaching, like that's the same idea. Like leaders are
Yes.
coaches
Yeah.
of their teams. It's not about never giving up. Like, oh, she's a resilient leader. She never gives up. We just talked about how the hardest thing is quitting. And that's sometimes
Yes.
the most important decision. It's not about, not feeling stress and being always cool and calm and not at all. So there are all these counterintuitive aspects of
Yes.
leadership. I think we need to bring the psychology, especially the positive psychology aspect to it, to the world of business. It's making its way into the world of business. I hope to make my contribution as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What, like, a couple of thoughts I have is, you mentioned empathy. We have to be empathetic towards our people. And I'm interested to hear your take on this. I'll offer mine first. What I notice, probably the number one breakdown in leadership, is that the leader sees something over there that they wish to correct and is not yet conscious of where they are doing some version of the same thing. And we can't have empathy without, on some level, having gone through the experience ourselves. We can have sympathy. We can intellectually kind of understand, oh, I get like what that must be like for them, but that's distinct. And so what happens, I notice, is one, we as humans have resistance to leaning into those places ourselves because it's uncomfortable. We have blind spots and we probably have judgment about what our team members doing. So we don't want to see ourselves doing that. Two, it's vulnerable and humbling to actually walk through that, and usually kind of confronting because, again, we have to lean over the edge and be in the moment of practice. And on the other side of that, then we have so much space for what our leaders and our teams and all of them are going through. But that is earned through the fires of, walking through it in the moment. And it's much more compelling, to put it in our heads and to have these great tools and rules and things to follow. So that's a little bit of my take on empathy, and part of what is being asked for from, the statistic you said, 60 to 70% unengaged. We need leaders that are able to be in that with people as opposed to for people. What are your thoughts on empathy or any of what I've just shared?
Well, for me, my journey into studying personality psychology has been incredibly helpful in helping develop empathy because you don't want to stereotype based on personality psychology, but on the margin, it helps to understand people's introversion, extroversion, conscientiousness, openness, people's neuroticism. And once you develop those skills, those are actually super useful tools to develop more of the empathy. But the bottom line to me, Adam, is positive psychology has shown through the Harvard study that the number one factor of your long-term self-reported happiness is the quality of the relationships in your life.
Hmm.
What does that mean for the workplace?
I
Does
think
it
it's
mean
shown
we
that longitudinally too, right? Like that's been proven over many, many years.
80 years,
Yeah,
several
yeah,
generations? People would have to fill surveys every 6 or 12 months.
yeah,
This is how I'm feeling. This is how I'm doing. And they found that some people got sick, some people lived healthy lives, some people made a ton of money, some people didn't, some went to jail. And they just tried to extract what
yeah,
drove the self-reported happiness scores. And it was quality of relationship. And the crazy thing, Adam, like it also led to healthier
yes,
physical lives.
yeah,
Makes people live longer to have quality relationships in your lives. And this is completely unscientific. It's just a bit of a thought experiment. But you know how like there's a big debate about alcohol right now. The
yes,
alcohol consumption is down,
yep,
and it's really bad for you. Not even like one drink is
yes,
messes up your sleep.
yep,
But if you have a couple beers while you socialize and develop deeper, meaningful relationships, it's probably not
yes,
the ideal way of doing it, but it has actually a positive effect. We'll let someone else research this, but it's just a thought that occurred to me. So those relationships are super important, but in the team, in the business, in your family, how do you foster positive relationships? It's not about everybody being nice to everybody and always seeking consensus.
yeah,
It's about trust. It's about mutual respect. Yes, being nice is awesome. But in business, it's also about feedback.
Yeah.
How you handle the feedback process.
Not just business, I would assert in relational dynamics, period. Because we all want to be authentic, and then we complain when someone else responds a particular way. That's feedback to our authentic. We need that. Please continue.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Adam, can I give you some feedback?
Sebastian, go right ahead.
Okay, so I love your reaction. This was just a little bit of an experiment. When people hear, can I give you some feedback? We usually have a fear response. You responded like cool as a cucumber and like, go ahead, because you're embracing it. But like for most people, especially in the workplace, feedback is threatening.
Yes. Yeah.
For athletes, it's awesome. Coach, tell me what to do. I want to get better. For business leaders to get feedback, it's difficult. Now,
fraught.
It's fraught. There is research, however, this is from Dr. David Rock. He kind of invented the field of neuro leadership. He did all these studies about feedback and realized that you could decrease the stress response from feedback by about 50% with one little trick. So they would have people hooked to monitors, measure their sweat, their heart rate, and there would be a feedback process. And interestingly, the feedback process is stressful for the person giving the feedback too, not just the person receiving it. But he developed this thing and this research where they proved that this little trick reduces the stress from the giver to the receiver by about 50%. Can you guess what it is? It's just a different frame.
Yeah, my guess would have been sort of, instead of feedback, there'd be a different way to put it forward, to invite it or to elicit it.
I think that would certainly help. Like for myself, I can say, like, if I just did a presentation to a client and there was a salesperson in the room and I say, can I get, and they say, here's the feedback. It's a little bit easier if they frame it differently. Like, hey, here's how we can do it better next time. That's usually easier. But the David Rock research is very simple. If the receiver asks for the feedback, it makes all the difference. It reduces the stress in the process.
Yeah.
So instead of going around, can I give you some feedback? And it's like, I hate that question. Like, I don't want to, like, my mental boxing gloves get up if you ask me that. That's why I asked it to you, right? I wanted to see a reaction. You didn't bite at all though, but if that, so as a leader, leading by example, being vulnerable, all the things you talked about, Adam, going around as a leader, asking for feedback can be very powerful. It's difficult, it's vulnerable, but you're modeling a behavior with your team that's encouraging of doing the same. And that overall, if people get in the practice of asking for feedback, and maybe to your point on framing in a way that's about how can I do better next time? Like what should we tweak for the next one? Like focused on improvement rather than what you did wrong.
Yeah.
It makes a whole world of difference. So, hey, even in the family too, I can go and ask my wife, like, in a way or another, like, what's the feedback? But, it's, it helps. It certainly helps. Because otherwise it's, people don't enjoy it as much.
I'll add on. I love that. And I'm going to add on one ontological, which is to say a being-based piece rather than a doing, what to say or do a based piece. And then we'll wind down. I want to just hear, what you want people to know about you or find your work. One of the things I've noticed is people, once they've moved to the frame you're offering, which is a great one, asking for feedback, one of the things they'll do is they look for the feedback that agrees with what they already know. And the way that they'll do that subtly internally is someone will say, great, I'd love to give you some feedback. Here's some of the stuff you do. And the way that they receive that is through the lens of, do I actually do that? So yes or no. Instead of taking that feedback in and asking themselves the question, where do I do that? So I think that there's some really powerful, it's more vulnerable because if we ask that question, we have to be willing to take their feedback in, even and especially if we don't like it. But that's where our growth, usually the most resistant we are to feedback, is the place where that feedback is going to have the biggest difference for us. So having said that, what would you like people to know about your work? Where should they go to read more about you or to learn? Obviously, you've got the book out, so tell us a little bit about that.
The Psychology of Leadership, available anywhere books are sold, by Sébastien Page. You can find it on Amazon's probably the easiest way. And you can also find me on social media on LinkedIn or Instagram, Sébastien Page. That's it, Adam.
Cool. And then you want people to send you a ton of emails and fill your inbox with just accolades and stuff, right? To add to your daily to-do.
Ego versus mastery.
He just stares politely at the camera. Sébastien, I really want to acknowledge you for your playfulness and your brilliance in particular. You know, it's super clear. Part of the way of being you bring into the space is the ability to articulate complicated things and bring the dots closer together or further away. And I just imagine that's such a gift in an area of expertise that is highly complex. You know, there's just so much complexity and derivatives on top of derivatives on top of derivatives. So thanks for doing the work you're doing, and thanks for doing it with such an open heart. I'm really present to your warmth and your kindness, and I'm pretty certain that that wasn't just free. You know, I can feel the depth of work behind allowing that to be the case. So thanks for bringing all of that here, and thanks for sharing all of your wisdom and brilliance with us.
Thank you, Adam. How are you doing? Feeling a bit?
I'm doing good. I'm doing great.
Good.
I'm fondly remembering past podcasts where my dog was lying right here, snoring very loudly on the microphone, and just fondly remembering them. And I really enjoyed this conversation too.
Awesome. Likewise. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to end this stream and then we'll just say goodbye to each other. So everyone, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed the podcast, please share it. Definitely check out Sébastien's book. And if you have guests or conversations or topics along these lines that you'd like to hear about, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, we will say adieu in the stream.